Hola amigos de YouTube, buenos días, buenas tardes o buenas noches, dependiendo de qué lugar nos estén mirando. En esta oportunidad traigo un tema que tal vez alguno de ustedes sepan, pero no tienen todos los antecedentes del tema. Se trata de cómo la Iglesia Católica ha ocultado por 55 años el verdadero tercer secreto de Fátima. Como quizás muchos de ustedes sabrán en qué consisten los secretos de Fátima, para los que no los conozcan les puedo decir que es la aparición de la Virgen a 3 pastorcillos de corta edad, a los cuales se les mostró ciertos acontecimientos que ocurrirían en el lapso de algunos años. La hermana Lucía era una de esos 3 pastorcillos, la cual unos años antes de morir escribió el tercer y último secreto que les había mostrado la Virgen, con expresas instrucciones de que se diera a conocer al público no antes del año 1960, ya que en ese año el secreto sería más entendible. Bueno, vamos de lleno al tema.
(1960) was the year the third secret was going to be revealed. Great expectation, great anticipation of this.
She had said, at the very latest, it had to be revealed by 1960. And when she was asked why 1960, she said because then it would become more clear.
And we waited, and still nothing, and nothing, and nothing.
I remember the feeling. I can only describe it as a kind of spiritual desolation when I learned that the decision had been made and the third secret would not be revealed.
So to dismiss the message of Fatima is to dismiss prophecy as such.
Some of us have figured out what the third secret is. With the help of people who read the secret.
One of the most intriguing aspects of the Fatima message is the third part of the Fatima secret, the so-called Third Secret, which was given on July 13, 1917. The first 2 parts of the secret, Sister Lucy recorded in her memoirs that she wrote in August 1941. The first part described the vision of hell that she and her 2 cousins saw. And the second part of the secret concerned devotion to the Immaculate Heart. Sister Lucy would not write down the third part of the secret, but subsequently gave what appears to be the beginning of it. In December 1941, she wrote, "In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, etc." The rest of the third secret had yet to be put down on paper.
In June 1943, Sister Lucy became very ill. She became so sick that by September, the Bishop of Fatima was worried that she might die. And he was concerned that she might die and not write down the secret, the third secret. And so he went to her and suggested to her that she write it down so that the secret would be not published at this time, but at least it would be there for the record. And so Sister Lucy thought about it and told the bishop, if you give me an order, if you give me a formal written order to write it down, I will obey. But I cannot do this on my own. I cannot take this initiative by myself. So the bishop thought about it for a month, and he prayed about it. And so in October, he in fact wrote the formal command to tell her to write down the third part of the secret, or as is known, the third secret. Sister Lucy, as soon as she got the order, immediately set about to obey. And she tried for all of October, the rest of the month, all November, and all December to write down the secret. She could not bring herself to put pen to paper to write down the third part of the secret. Finally, on the 2nd of January 1944, in the chapel in Tui, Our Lady appeared to her and told her that indeed it was the will of God that she write down the secret. So Sister Lucy wrote down the secret.
In 1957, just before the envelope containing the third secret was sent from Portugal to the Vatican at the request of the Vatican, Auxiliary Bishop Venancio found himself alone with this envelope. So he held the envelope up to the light to see what was in it. And holding that envelope to the light, he could see that the third secret was on one sheet of paper, and it consisted of about 24 to 25 lines.
Sister Lucy wrote the first part of the secret, the vision of hell. She, in her writing down the first part of the secret, she tells us that she was so frightened, and her cousins also, that they trembled with fear, and that she concludes that she herself would have died of fright had not Our Lady cut the vision short, and had not she been promised to be taken to heaven. So it was a terrifying thing for her to see, and yet she could write it down with apparently relative ease compared to writing down the third secret. And she wrote in the second part of the secret about the annihilation. That is, she used in other parts of her writing or speaking, she said that various nations will disappear from the face of the earth. She understood that the annihilation of nations is something terrible, and she could describe this without very much difficulty. But to write down the third part of the secret, she could not do it for more than 2 months without the intervention of the Blessed Virgin. It must be something terrible.
Cabe destacar que en esta primera parte hablan dos sacerdotes católicos, y a continuación escucharemos el relato de cómo la Iglesia Católica hace caso omiso del mandato de la Virgen y no revela el secreto en el año 1960.
The 2 envelopes containing the secret were ultimately transferred to the Vatican in 1957. Sister Lucy had written on the outside of each of the envelopes that the secret was to be opened and revealed to the world in 1960.
Canon Barthas writes about his meeting with Sister Lucy in 1946. She was with the Bishop of Fatima, and Canon Barthas asked, when will the third part of the secret, or the third secret, be released? And they both said 1960. He asked, why 1960? And they both replied, because the Blessed Virgin wishes it so. Now in 1955, Cardinal Ottaviani met Sister Lucy on May 17th. After he had been to Fatima, he went to Coimbra. And there he asked Sister Lucy, why 1960? And she answered, because it will be clearer.
In January 1959, Pope John XXIII announced the forthcoming Second Vatican Council. In August of the same year, after having read the secret, he was reported to have said, "The third secret does not concern the years of my pontificate." Thus, 1960 came and went, and despite the Virgin's explicit request, the secret was not revealed, even though the entire Catholic world was awaiting its publication. In February 1960, a high Vatican official made an anonymous report to the press, stating, "It is most likely that the letter in which Sister Lucy wrote down the words of the Virgin, which Our Lady confided as a secret to the 3 little shepherds in the Covata era, will never be opened. It is most probable that the secret of Fatima will remain forever under absolute seal."
She has said, at the very latest, it had to be revealed by 1960. And when she was asked why 1960, she said because then it would become more clear.
That was the decade that changed the face of the world and changed the face of the church. So it's not at all surprising that she chose that year and said that in that year things would be clearer, because in a very short time frame, disasters would happen to the world and to the church, to the families, to our Christian society.
Does the third secret indeed predict disasters throughout the world, and in particular portray a crisis within the church? A crisis of faith? Sister Lucy herself provided a key clue when she wrote the following in her 4th memoir. In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, etc.
In September of 1952, Pope Pius XII sent a priest named Father Joseph Schweigel to interview Sister Lucy in Portugal on the third secret. This is a specific interrogation about the third secret. And when Father Schweigel came back, here's what he said. He said, "I cannot reveal anything of what I learned at Fatima concerning the third secret, but I can say that it has 2 parts. One concerns the Pope. The other, logically, although I must say nothing, would have to be the continuation of the words, 'In Portugal, the dogma of faith will always be preserved.'"
When Sister Lucy said that the faith was going to be preserved in Portugal, that implies that the faith is going to be destroyed in most other places. That's the clear implication. And I think we've seen at least one or two generations of young people in which the faith has been totally lost.
Fatima scholars are in agreement that within the mysterious etc., one will find the words of the Virgin Mary, which predict a great crisis of faith within the Catholic Church, a loss of dogma outside of the nation of Portugal, and an apostasy reaching even the highest levels of the Catholic hierarchy. And this is confirmed by those who have actually read the text of the Third Secret.
Cardinal Odie said that the Third Secret has nothing to do with Gorbachev. Our Lady was warning us against the apostasy in the Church. Bishop Amar do Amaral of Fatima in 1984, he said the Third Secret has nothing to do with atomic bombs or Persian missiles. It concerns the faith.
Father Joaquin Alonso, who died in 1981, was the official archivist at Fatima for 16 years and had many conversations with Sister Lucy. Here is what he had to say about the secret. It is therefore completely probable that the text makes concrete references to the crisis of faith within the Church and to the negligence of the pastors themselves and the internal struggles in the very bosom of the Church and of grave pastoral negligences of the upper hierarchy. One of the most important testimonies regarding the contents of the secret came from an interview given by Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, now Pope Benedict XVI. At the time, he was the prefect of the Vatican Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and as such had access to the secret, and he read it.
Cardinal Ratzinger, in his 1984 interview with Jesu magazine, he said that the Third Secret concerns the dangers to the faith, to the life of the Christian, and therefore to the life of the world.
Según lo leído en esta segunda parte, el tercer secreto se trataría de los graves problemas internos que tiene la Iglesia Católica, cosa que estamos viendo hoy en día. Además nos deja entrever que aquellos problemas se irán acrecentando cada vez más y que las personas de todo el mundo, vale decir los católicos, irán perdiendo la fe, tanto en Dios como en la Iglesia. Además hace referencia a palabras que dijo el retirado para Benedicto XVI, donde casi asevera que la Iglesia pasa o pasará por graves problemas de fe, cosa que es muy probable haya sido una de las causales de su renuncia al papado. Veamos ahora la tercera parte donde se menciona el Concilio Vaticano II, donde la Iglesia Católica ha hecho tantos cambios en las liturgias que ya se está perdiendo su principal fin, adorar a Dios sobre todas las cosas.
Does this crisis of faith, identified by the witnesses who have read the Third Secret, have anything to do with the Second Vatican Council? The Council began scarcely 2 years after 1960, the year the Third Secret was supposed to have been revealed. Given the period of unprecedented upheaval and scandal in the Catholic Church following the Council, a growing number of Catholics are convinced of a link between the Third Secret and the Council and its aftermath, especially the changes in the Catholic Mass, which began in the early 1960s.
In the 1930s, when he was still Vatican Secretary of State, the future Pope Pius XII made an astonishing prophecy about the upcoming upheaval in the Church. He predicted with terrific degree of accuracy just about everything that was going to go wrong in the Church. And his prophecy is recounted in the biography of Pius XII by Monsignor Roche. Let me read to you from that prophetic remark. I am worried by the Blessed Virgin's messages to Lucy of Fatima. This persistence of Mary about the dangers which menace the Church is a divine warning against the suicide of altering the faith in her liturgy, her theology, and her soul. I hear all around me innovators who wish to dismantle the sacred chapel, destroy the universal flame of the Church, reject her ornaments, and make her feel remorse for her historical past. A day will come when the civilized world will deny its God, when the Church will doubt, as Peter doubted. She will be tempted to believe that man has become God. In our churches, Christians will search in vain for the red lamp where God awaits them. Like Mary Magdalene, weeping before the empty tomb, they will ask, where have they taken him? So about 30 years before the Second Vatican Council, the future Pope Pius XII predicted everything that would go wrong during and after the Council in the Catholic Church. He predicted drastic changes to the liturgy, so drastic that people would not even be able to find the sanctuary lamp in Catholic churches. He predicted theological changes. He even predicted this movement in the Church to make the Church apologize for her own past, as if the Church were to be ashamed of everything that had gone before and should feel remorse for it. And he linked these predictions to the message of Fatima, which is very interesting, because none of the words of the Virgin of Fatima published to date contain any reference to these catastrophic developments in the Church. Clearly, Pope Pius XII was referring to a portion of the message of Fatima containing words of the Virgin Mary which we have yet to see.
Elements of Protestantism, both in the symbolism and in the wording of the liturgy, were brought into and mixed into a Catholic framework, to the extent that the makers of the new rite flatly stated that this is no longer the Roman rite, it is a new creation.
I would sum up the effect of the changes of the liturgy in the last 40 years on the faithful as there's no more faith in the faithful.
Even Cardinal Ratzinger, who was now Pope Benedict XVI, said that the liturgical changes which followed the Second Vatican Council were a breach in the history of the liturgy, whose consequences could only be tragic. But the crisis in the Church also includes other changes. In his prophecy in the 1930s before the Second Vatican Council, the future Pope Pius XII spoke not only of the suicide of altering the faith in the Church's liturgy, but also in her theology. And here we see emerging in the post-conciliar period the theological novelty of the modern ecumenical movement.
The priests began talking differently, using strange language we'd never heard before. They started talking about dialogue and being ecumenical.
Vatican II brought in the new era of ecumenism. The Church always taught that there is only one true faith, one true church outside of which there's no salvation. And the purpose of Catholic churchmen and missionaries is to go forth, teach all nations, and baptize them in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost, and bring them in to the one ecclesia that our Lord established. But with the Second Vatican Council's new ecumenism, they adopted, I should say, a different form of church oneness and church unity that you can trace it point by point that came actually from the Protestant World Council of Churches.
Unfortunately, when we speak of ecumenism, we're not simply talking about propositions, doctrines set forth in the documents of the Second Vatican Council. There are consequences to these teachings, because these are not something that are simply considered in the classrooms theoretically. The promulgation of the decrees on ecumenism and religious liberty have spawned in the Church a new orientation in the Church, an opening up of interreligious dialogue, of encouraging Catholics to become involved with members of other churches and other religions in such a way that has caused great confusion and even loss of faith among the Catholic people. What it leads to, I think, is a very good concrete example is the desecration of the sanctuary of Our Lady of Fatima that took place a couple of years ago, when the rector, Monsignor Luciano Guerra, invited the Hindus and a Hindu priest into the shrine of Our Lady of Fatima. And they offered, and the Hindu priest, wearing Hindu vestments, performed the pagan idolatrous ceremonies of Hinduism on the Catholic altar at the shrine of Our Lady of Fatima, at the Cappellina, the little chapel, the place where Our Lady appeared.
There are no other churches that our Lord would found as a means to salvation. There is only one religion. God cannot reveal different religions with contradictory ideas about himself, about the way how to save one's soul. So to accept this unity in plurality means to reject the Catholic Church and Catholic religion. It goes together.
The new church has become ecumenical, as I call it, and turning anywhere and everywhere to embrace all other religions. The only thing in the modern church that is not acceptable is tradition.
See, the thing is, all you need to do is look at what happened to the church after 1960, and it's fairly clear what the third secret is. What Our Lady wanted us to know in 1960 is clear.
The real secret has to do with the collapse of the faith, coming from the upper hierarchy. And we know this also because the two things that we see from Sister Lucy that bracket the third secret, 1957, the famous interview with Father Fuentes, when she says God is about to punish the world. And the way God is going to punish the world, she says, is there's going to be a great loss of faith among priests and religious. Then, after the third secret was supposed to be released around the end of the 1960s, she's talking about a diabolical disorientation of the upper hierarchy. So these two messages, these two warnings from Sister Lucy bracket the third secret. The collapse of priests and bishops who are going to stray from their vocation. And you don't stray from your vocation by leaving necessarily. You stray from your vocation also by staying in and corrupting the faith from within. And then she talks about precisely that at the end of 1960, a diabolical disorientation of the upper hierarchy. These are the things we have from Sister Lucy that bracket the year 1960.
I believe that when the secret was opened, it was clear that this secret was about the apostasy in the church, and that this would be brought about by a change in the Mass and by a council. And therefore, that was exactly, obviously, the plan of John the 23rd, to call a council. He had already made the preparations, and to alter the Mass in some way in line with these new teachings that were to be promulgated by the council. And therefore, a rebuke to the Pope, a statement that if these things are done, disasters shall come to the world and to the church, and the faith shall be lost throughout Europe. I think that's what was very shocking for him, and in my mind, that explains his stark response, and a response that should not have been given. This is not for our time. Well, it was precisely for our time. Our Lady had said it was for our time, and it was for him.
Como nos podemos dar cuenta, ya el Papa Pío XII vaticinó los graves acontecimientos que ocurrirían en el interior de la Iglesia Católica, cosa que ya estamos viendo hoy. Con la promulgación del Concilio Vaticano II hemos visto una destrucción de las leyes de Dios, los cambios en las misas, tratar de unificar a las religiones y profanar los cultos sagrados. Hoy en día cada vez más personas se alejan de las iglesias por sus profundos cambios, por sus contradicciones con la fe, y solo basta con ir a una misa católica para darse cuenta que es totalmente diferente a como era hace años atrás. Bueno amigos, para que este vídeo no se haga tan largo, abajo en la descripción les dejaré el enlace a la segunda parte del vídeo donde veremos los castigos que nombra la Virgen de Fátima para el mundo, y también veremos lo que la Iglesia Católica dijo al público cuando dio a conocer el supuesto tercer secreto de Fátima. Muchas gracias por toda su atención y no olviden dar me gusta, comentar y suscribirse a mi canal. Nos vemos en la segunda parte del vídeo. Adiós.